All right. All right. Welcome back to another episode of On Authentic Leadership with the Colonel and the Coach. Very pleased to welcome a longtime friend and former colleague of myself, Devan McConnell. Devan is currently the head of sports performance at newly named Utah Mammoth. And again, very happy to have him join us. Thanks for coming on, Devan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we usually start if you could just maybe just give an overview of obviously where you're at, but a little bit of your path, and then we'll kind of start off from there.
Yeah, so currently the high performance director with the Utah Mammoth in the National Hockey League. As you mentioned, we just had a name change. We spent our first year sort of in transition. We were the Utah Hockey Club. Previous to that, essentially the same organization, but a different owner as the Arizona Coyotes. So collectively, I've been with this team for 5 years, going into year 6. My role essentially is to oversee and lead the high performance group, which consists of sports science, strength and conditioning, and nutrition as sort of subsets within the performance space. My general background, sort of my career path has been as a strength and conditioning coach or a performance coach, sort of turned sports scientist. Those are kind of one and the same thing, just a coach that utilizes data and technology essentially. But going backwards, so I've been here for 5 years. Previous to that, I was in a similar role with the New Jersey Devils, also in the National Hockey League. I was the director of performance science and reconditioning. So specifically sort of ran our sports science program and dealt with late stage return to play scenarios with our athletes. And then again, working backwards, spent about 9 years at UMass Lowell. That's where Cam and I got to know each other and coached together. So I was the performance coach for the men's ice hockey team there. And a little before that, I started my career at Stanford University as a performance coach. So that's been kind of the background. Professionally, I went to school for exercise science, which is essentially a foundational subset of kind of all the different disciplines that I've talked about. And that's kind of the background. Grew up playing hockey, played college hockey, and then had found my way back into the hockey world.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, long and accomplished. And Devan, there's two things I kind of want to start with, but I think you mentioned a little bit of just the science side of things, and I just think that one of my favorite things about you is the way that you've continued to evolve and always trying to get better, always trying to improve, and not afraid to say, "Hey, I don't know what I didn't know," or you just have never stopped growing, learning, developing. And has that always been your style, or is that something that was ignited in you in the sports science world? How would you kind of quantify that?
Yeah, I think I've always considered myself kind of a lifelong learner. Even as a kid, I can think back, specifically as a hockey player, as a goalie, like always thirsty to learn more. And I've always enjoyed the educational process and learning. And I think one of my few strengths is I've always realized that I I don't know it all. And so I've been willing to learn and listen to others and sort of admit when I make mistakes and just try to grow from those things. But I think that's probably foundational to who I am, as somebody that just enjoys learning, enjoys improving, always trying to find a better way to do what I'm doing. I'm passionate about the space that I'm in. I'm lucky to be able to work in an area that I really love and I'm passionate about. So it kind of makes trying to get better easy because it's something that I'm always interested in.
Two things that I remember from you came in, and I think some of the obviously the advancements with technology, right? That's helped you a ton. But the other side of things was one of the first things and it was actually after my time, but just getting into sprinting, which was just a different way to do your job, or I guess a different input to get a different output. And so again, those are two different things. What I'm asking is like, because again, it's one thing to learn in a book, right? But then you changed dramatically in the sprint side, right? You didn't sprint at all when we did that at Lowell. Is that fair?
Yeah, right. Two different but similar areas. I mean, on the technology side, and again, how I sort of, I guess, organically became a sports scientist in this space of performance training was really just an interest in asking questions or having questions and finding avenues to try to explore those questions and find answers. I mean, the first foray for me kind of into that space was utilizing heart rate monitors in our training and on the ice with our college hockey players. And that started from a question that I had about what was happening physiologically to our players when they were on the ice in practice and in games. And, so traditionally, strength and conditioning kind of sits over here. This is the stuff you do in the gym. And then what happens on the ice or on the pitch or the field or the court that's the sport. And at least in the collegiate setting, they're separate things. And it never made sense to me because, well, what's happening on the ice? I mean, there's a physical response to that. What's happening in the gym should be influencing those things. So sports science lens started with trying to better understand physiologically what was happening with our players, and then using that information to make more informed decisions about how we train and when we rest and do those things. And then, it grew. And then my interest in those areas grew and my questions grew. But on the flip side of that, you talk about sprinting and inserting sprinting into how we trained and making that sort of more of an emphasis. And again, it was the same kind of thought process. And I'm fortunate to have some really intelligent mentors that have gone down these roads ahead of me. And so I've, been able to follow their lead a lot of times. But the question, again, strength and conditioning in a traditional sense is like pick up heavy things, put them down. And that's just, that's one thing. And then the sport is over here. It's like, well, speed is really important in most sports, right? Acceleration is really important. Like a lot of times the best players are faster than other guys. Well, how do we improve that? Can we actually make our players faster? And so our training programs, had evolved over time to be more and more emphasized around those key performance indicators. What are we actually trying to improve? And then how do we go about improving it? Well, if we're trying to get faster, if that's important, what do we have to do to help guys get faster? And, Cam, to your point, like a lot of that became, well, we need to pay more attention to actually sprinting. And so our programs evolved. And again, in conjunction with being able to collect data and being able to better understand what was going on. And, now at the NHL level, like there's so much data, you're almost overwhelmed by it, but we can see exactly what happens on the ice in games with literally every player in the league. We can evaluate how fast players are, when they slow down, are they able to maintain speeds, all kinds of different metrics, not just speed, but again, all of that sports science information influences then how we try to train our athletes and how we try to improve what they're doing so they can be the best version of themselves on the ice.
Now that I think we've qualified you as an expert, the second thread, and this is where I think this is how the puzzle puts together with what Matt and I do, is just you've taken all of that as your avenue in to the person, right? And I can remember having conversation with you last summer and obviously in previous times, but like whatever level, whether it's Stanford, women's basketball, Lowell, men's hockey, NHL, anybody that you've personally trained, is you used a thing that's always kind of stayed with me is you're trying to use your tools, knowledge, whatever, to help somebody be the best version of them. And I think that's how this puzzle piece together into, again, what Matt and I do is just how have you taken that angle from sports science and got into the person and use that as your role as a mentor, as a human, as somebody that an advocate? How have you done that, and how has that changed maybe from the college level to the pro level?
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, sort of a foundational philosophical part of who I am. Like I've always viewed coaching as more than just trying to win games, but trying to connect and help that person, that team, become the best version of themselves. And I mean that both on and off the ice. Now, obviously, that's different at the professional level versus the collegiate level. I think at the collegiate level, that was a really important component to me. Like I always said, like the biggest feather in your cap is like 5 years after one of your players graduates and moves on, they're getting married and you get invited to the wedding, or they reach out to you when they're in town and want to grab coffee, because that means you've made a genuine connection with this young person and in a really influential time in their life, and certainly help them hopefully athletically in whatever sport that was, whatever endeavor, but much more importantly, help them grow as a person and learn as a person. I think at the professional level, I mean, obviously it's much more cutthroat. It is wins and losses, and you're on short-term contracts, and if you don't win, that's it, you're out. So the relationships can be different, but at the same time, I think foundationally, it's still the same. You're still dealing with other human beings, and they have, other things going on in their life. And so for me to be able to, get the best out of them from a performance perspective, or get them to allow me to do some of the things in sports science that I need to do to help do my job to help them. And they don't have to do any of those things at this level. It comes back to trust and relationships and communication. And with that, hopefully, comes a different type of relationship with these guys. You're not dealing with 20-year-olds now, you're dealing with grown adults, grown men. In my setting, have kids, have families, they're paying mortgages, and what they're doing on the ice that's their livelihood. So there's a different level there. But still, if I don't connect with them, if I can't create a relationship with them, it's a lot harder for me to be able to do my job and get them to buy into some of the things that we're trying to do. So whether it was the collegiate level or the professional level, it's still very similar in terms of you have to create relationships and you have to build trust. And that can be harder at this level just because there's a lot more kind of at stake sometimes. And people are, again, they're grown-ups. They're not kids anymore. So they've gone through those years, but foundationally, I think it's the same thing.
Devan, you're obviously a very science-based background, and there's a level of analytics involved that you trust, right? Because you believe in science. But, even from what we do from a leadership development perspective, leadership training, we could look at all the analytics and all that sort of stuff, but ultimately it comes down to the human, right? And the person is the foundational piece. How much of your job, when you evaluate the person, how much you're looking to enhance their physical performance, but there's a mental side of it that they need to get buy-in as well. How, in your getting to know the person, does that factor into enhancing the level of performance? Because arguably it's the difference between a home game and an away game. Spending time with their family, not spending time with their family, being in a good, safe space, mentally, and not being in a good, safe space. But I was wondering, how you evaluate that, just being an athlete yourself and being someone who, has just, traversed the country and seen different environments, just how you weigh that into what you do for Utah.
That's a great question. I mean, the reality is, as analytical as I am and as kind of my role is, there's an art and a science to doing this. And it's not just about what does the data say today. Everything is contextual. To your point, exactly. You're dealing with humans. So it's the role, the job, the space is as much about, again, I talked about how important relationships are. Having those relationships, building that trust allows, for example, for me to be able to ask and get an honest response from a player when they do a force plate jump and their test doesn't look very good, and the implications of that could be X, Y, and Z. But it's if we trust each other, we can have a conversation. Hey, what's going on? You're down today. Like, what's up? A new baby. The baby was up all night. I didn't get any sleep. Like, okay, that makes perfect sense. Like we can work with that. If it's all, if it's just data and it's just numbers, the human gets lost in that. And the reality is, from the mental perspective, like you talked about, you have to have that input. You have to have that communication.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I'll turn it back over to Cam. But obviously, generationally, the generation that you grew up with and what I grew up with, just different levels of communication. In other words, there's, of course, the face-to-face, there's the text, there's the communicating via phone, via email, and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, hockey has to be played essentially in the rink. How do you communicate? If you're talking to someone who wants to do what you want to do, what have you seen as like the different sort of modalities of communication that you use to kind of get your message across, other than just guys in the gym with you when you're working with them one-on-one? Just what are some tricks of the trade that you do to get your message across to communicate both that art and science piece?
I think it comes down to knowing the individual and learning what works for them, how they need to disseminate information. Some players want to have, daily one-on-one, interaction and just talk shop. Other guys are a little bit more, hey, come to me when it's something I need to know. Otherwise, I'm doing my thing. Same thing, in the summer, we spend a lot of time, our players disperse around the world. We spend a lot of time checking in with them, checking in with their personal coaches. Some want to do a FaceTime, some want text, some want a phone call. It just depends on what their language is. There was a concept of a mentor of mine talked about, he talked about dealing with coaches, learning to speak coach. Like, I know what we need to do, but if I can't translate that in your language as, a hockey coach, a basketball coach, or whatever, you're not going to listen to that. That's nonsense. But if I can talk in your language, now all of a sudden it makes sense. It's the same thing with the players. You need to learn their style, what they need to know, how they want to know it.
Do you feel, Devan, that like just having been a hockey guy and having been someone who's competed at a high level, do you think that that you can communicate better with the guys you're communicating with now? Or do you feel like that just, again, depending upon what you were doing, like whether it was with, volleyball or whether, regardless of the sport, you just adjust your level of communication to who that you're dealing with? And also in that context, does being back in the hockey world, does that excite you just from that perspective because you can communicate at their level?
I think it certainly helps that, I obviously have grown up in the sport. So there's a level of familiarity and understanding. Yeah. Like I can occasionally go out on the ice and skate with the guys, and, they can sort of respect that. Hey, you obviously know what you're doing as well. But I have worked in other sports where I've never played a basketball game in my life, but I worked in high level women's basketball. And again, it came back to the communication relationships, and certainly I needed to learn the language of the sport and understand those things and relay things in those terms. But yeah, but to the second point, like I'm very fortunate to get to work where I work because, essentially I'm a guy that likes the gym and I'm a guy that likes hockey, and I spend every day, all day in a hockey rink in a gym, so I'm very fortunate that I get to do something I really love.
Awesome. Thank you.
Devin, do you know if your picture's still on the wall at Pittsburgh?
I believe it is. Yes. Yes. Me and my good friend, Mike Dreyer, he's the other picture. It's much more flattering picture for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to explain it, or can I, or it's,
You go ahead. I know how much you enjoy this.
so again, Devin was a goalie, maybe a tad undersized goalie, played at Pittsburgh State. And, after I got to meet Devin, I was recruiting, watching, and literally of all the pictures you could take of somebody like in a goalie stance, right? Like there's a general stance, like how you would stand, and they have a picture of Devin with his glove like down between his legs, looking like he like took a ground ball. It was like I took the picture and sent it to him, and it's been a running joke going on like 10 years of Devin playing baseball on the ice. But it was I mean, we're talking about a legendary person here to be on that wall, and obviously it
Well, the
keeps.
worst part about it is because I was undersized, like I had to be a very technically sound goalie to have any ability at that level. So I really prided myself on that. Like I was a very technical goalie. And so this one picture of I don't know where this came from. It's like the least technical positioning you could ever see an athlete in. And that's somehow the one that went up on the wall when you walk in the rink, which I'm flattered that they put it there, but it's like, come on, what are we doing here?
That's fantastic. Devin, how about maybe talking about some of the lessons of breaking in at Stanford, where you were working under someone and then kind of running your own show at Lowell, and then working under someone for a while as Lowell transitioned to D1. You were running hockey. They brought in someone to run the school, and then back under someone or in conjunction, and now you're running at the top of that pyramid on the sports science and development and health side at Utah. Now you're running your own team, correct? So going from that guy underneath, because again, Matt and I try to work with those people that are maybe aspiring to reach up, and then also some of the people that are trying to do better to communicate down, and some of those lessons that you've identified and we could help people learn from.
Yeah, you've kind of touched on different stages of, my career from a leadership perspective. And I think probably familiar to a lot of people as they sort of climb whatever ladder they're on. Started out as an assistant coach, and that setting, you're in charge of your own team, but you're under, you're in a department with other coaches and at the time a performance director that led the group. And so my first real job out of college, so huge learning, steep learning curve, obviously, but the benefit of having people to lean on and having somebody, above me who's a great mentor and was able to really be a great leader for me and the other coaches and teach me. He had been there. So that was, a great place to start. And then moving to Lowell, Lowell was interesting because there's a lot of transition for me personally in the 9 years I was there. And when I first took the job, I was hired specifically as the strength coach for hockey. And then because it was a Division I hockey and Division II school, they were like, hey, can you help just organize the Division II side? They don't have any coaches. They don't have anything. So it was 90% hockey and 10% like gather some interns and just kind of clean up the weight room. And then as the university transitioned to full Division I, they brought on a performance staff to handle the other sports, and I remained primarily men's hockey. And so it was an interesting setup as well, because hockey at Lowell was sort of on an island. The rink was physically in a different part of the city. We were over here, and then the rest of the athletic department was over there. So there's interaction for me with the other coaches and with the person they brought in to lead that group. But I was very much on my own, which pros and cons to that. For 9 years, like, I ran my own thing and really didn't have to answer to anybody. So it was great because I could experiment and learn a lot and try things and do things. And that group was my group. And I was very ingrained with the coaching staff, with Cam and the rest of the coaches. But I was on an island. So I didn't have the benefit of like seeing leadership in action from our performance director, whatever the title was on the other side, who had done that, and we interacted, but I didn't really work under him. But the benefit, again, at that setting and at that time for me was I wore a lot of hats. I was the strength coach. I was the rehab coach. I was turned in the sports scientist. I was the dietitian. From some perspectives, the mental, training guy. Like, we had one person, which is common at that level. So I got to do it all. The downside to that is, like, I decided what we were going to do and we were going to do it. And if it wasn't a good idea, there was nobody there to mentor me or talk to me about that. I just had to find out, that didn't really work. The flip side is I got to do exactly what I wanted to do. And again, being sort of analytically and scientifically minded, everything was just an experiment. Does this work? Yes, great. Let's keep doing it. Oh, that didn't work. Let's change course. So I learned a tremendous amount. Go to New Jersey, and now I am under a performance director alongside an entire performance and health team. And I'm one cog in that bigger wheel. So instead of doing everything and getting to decide exactly what we're doing, now I have a niche responsibility within a larger team. Whether I agree or disagree with everything else that's happening, that's not really my place anymore. So a completely different setting. But again, now I had the benefit of having a leader above me that I could lean on and learn from in that new space. And then transitioning now, Arizona then, and now Utah as the performance director. Now I'm the leader at the top, and my job is really outside of the sports science niche, which is sort of my technical specific area. It's really to lead and facilitate that whole team. Strength coaches, dietitians, work alongside the medical staff, et cetera. So it's a whole new kind of skill set and new sort of area that for the last 5 or 6 years, I think I've grown a lot in and learned a lot in, but still make a ton of mistakes in as well.
Devin, I want to take it up more to the macro level. Obviously you're an American. You grew up in Washington State, played hockey on the East Coast, and then obviously you're here in Utah, doing what you just described. How would you compare? And it could be just from reading, just from experience, just from some of the players you work with. The Europeans look at food, they look at preparation, they look at their lifestyle. Just having lived, almost spent half my career in Europe, they look at it very differently than we do. They don't necessarily have all the same challenges we do, yet they have other unique things they deal with. Have you seen, when you inherit somebody that's from like a European, country, a player or someone that's gone over there and played, now they come back to the US, do you see, there's a similarity because there's a common denominator in hockey, or do you think that there's something to be learned from lifestyles that people have and adopted, not just in Europe, but in other parts of the world?
Yeah, without question. I mean, we have players from all over the world: Canadians, Americans, Swedes, Russians, players from Switzerland, et cetera. The cultural differences, I think, again, we have, like you said, we have hockey as a cornerstone, but the cultural differences of people from all these different countries and even different parts of these countries can be profound. I think it's a net benefit to be able to learn from what they did growing up, or what the pro system that looks like in, Sweden, for example, and things like that. I find it really interesting, the players that have come from Europe but have spent time previous to playing in the NHL in North America, whether it be Canadian junior hockey or in the NCAA. They're very different a lot of times when it comes to their habits or their training backgrounds and their nutritional backgrounds than players that come directly from Europe as well. But yeah, those are all, benefits and challenges of working with people from all over the world and trying to integrate everybody kind of under the same roof. And, the cultural differences can be very, very distinct for sure.
What about from just a dietary perspective? Is there anything that you've adopted, just because obviously nutrition plays in probably, just as much of a role as anything else? Is there anything that you've adopted just from a dietary perspective that you've seen like, holy crap, like, these guys got it going on. This is something that we need to make sure that we incorporate into our repertoire. Is there
Yeah.
anything that stands out to you?
Yeah. One of the biggest things is just like, I'll say how clean they eat a lot of times in Europe. And you know, the food sources are much cleaner, have less, whether it be pesticides, chemicals, etc. And so when those players come over, they can be, fortunately we have dietitians and chefs that kind of manage all of this, but they can be a lot pickier with sort of the quality of the food that we serve or that they want. And so, that's something that we're always striving to try to have our food service be as sort of clean and healthy as possible, as opposed to North Americans that are more familiar with, maybe you're more used to fast food and fried foods and things like that. So yeah, that definitely comes in for sure.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. I would just say, Devin, from my perspective, just have, literally lived, all over the world, Asia, Europe, a lot of time in Germany, Netherlands, Italy, that kind of thing. I have just seen culturally how much they appreciate, their food, how much they appreciate the goodness that goes into their food. And I know that there's a battle going on in our country right now to make sure that Americans, we start trying to prioritize certain things in our health, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. And I think certain people were prioritizing it long before being told to prioritize it. But it would make your job as somebody who is obviously at an elite level, if we as a country took on sort of a mantra of understanding the impact of what we put into our body, how it impacts our performance, obviously not just physically, but mentally, as well. But I also know that, like, unless, in Europe, it just became a thing, right? Just became how people prepared their meals at home, how people prepared their meals, going out and all that sort of stuff. I also understand that in some cases it's expensive, right? Like, to eat clean to the level that you're talking about, I mean, it requires some significant consideration, right? Some significant planning, where it's going to be sourced from and all that sort of stuff. And I applaud you for doing what you do, because it is important. And if it's important enough for an elite NHL athlete, then it probably should be important for somebody who's not an elite NHL athlete. It should be important for everybody, regardless of where they live and what they do. And so hopefully there's, we can start kind of, I think, adopt some of those lifestyle changes in our lives that make us more healthy as Americans, if you will.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The nice thing, at this level is most of the players, regardless of where they're from, at this point, understand those things. They understand the importance of nutrition, what they put in their body, and the implications. So, as a rule of thumb, I think at least NHL players, I couldn't speak to other sports, but
Right.
tend to be fairly health conscious when it comes to their food, because again, they understand, like, they're trying to squeak out a career and everything matters. And so what they put in their body, most of them take pretty seriously. So, but I couldn't agree more. I think we'd all be in a better spot just in society if we all were able to kind of adopt that mindset.
Yeah, Cam did a great job at Norwich over the time that I was able to spend with him, just making sure the guys, had sustenance, had access to food and whatnot. I mean, you're burning obviously thousands of calories, and wondering where your next meal is going to come from really, really stinks. And Cam just did a tremendous job over the Norwich guys to make sure that they had what they needed, whenever they needed it. And I just noticed that. And I also know that all NCAA teams don't necessarily probably have the resources to do that. And, anyways, just something, maybe it's a habit that he picked up at UMass Lowell with you guys, but I think it worked out really well, and it showed in how well they performed.
Yeah, a lot of times it can be the low hanging fruit that people don't
Yeah,
think
it
about
is.
in an athletic
Yeah,
setting, is and just making some small improvements in that area can go a long way.
absolutely. And I think that the 2 minutes that the coach spends, hey, what's the plan? If it's day 7 of sub sandwiches, guess what? The guys are going to get pretty sick of it. If it's, day 7 of just something that's marginal, your body's going to be like, yep, guess what? I don't appreciate this. I'm not going to react to it well. And it's like expecting someone to perform on 2 to 3 hours of sleep and to do that multiple days in a row. It's not, the body hasn't time to repair. You don't have time to reset, and just not good. So, yeah.
Dev, what about your communication with coach? I know you said you had to learn coach speak, but now you've got a general manager, you've got a head coach, you've got assistant coaches. I know a little bit of your past, but just are those areas like how much time is taken in that communication? How much have you, and has that changed over the 5 years? I mean, you've had the head coach and GM has been pretty consistent, right? So has that changed and morphed kind of as the trust has grown, as the community, could you explain maybe that relationship?
Yeah, for each of those stakeholders, the communication is a little bit different. It's just like the players; they want to know information in different ways, right? And so learning those things over time helps build trust, helps build buy-in. Um, helps build relationships. Like for instance, our coach. A lot of my job is disseminating information. Like that's really what a lot of what I do is like I'm the filter point for the coach, for the GM, for the medical group, for the performance group, whatever. And knowing what to say, kind of when. So our coach wants to know primarily from us what's the energy level of the group. Is this a day that we should and can push hard? Where should we rest? Like, and if I need to know something, tell me. Otherwise, we're good. No news is good news. The GM has very specific things that he wants from a report on a weekly basis. So it's being able to put those things together and anticipating those questions and having that type of information. To your point, Cam, over time, those relationship building skills, I guess I would say, have helped improve or increase my roles and responsibilities, right? So, just as an example, literally yesterday, I was on a call with our president, our GM, our head coach, our European pro scouts, because we're trying to sign a player from Russia that a couple of teams are recruiting right now as a free agent. So that's probably not a call that I'm on 3 years ago. However, at this point in time, I've been able to demonstrate, our importance and how we can add value from our department and how that can now be, we see that organizationally as a selling point. Like, so they wanted me to come on and talk about sports science and data and what we do and how we do this and what it does. And, as a selling point for this player. So again, those types of things have grown over time, just as we, as an organization, we've basically all been here together. The GM hired me and the coach pretty much at the same time. So we've grown in these roles together and grown, as a group together. So those things have all kind of added over time.
Devan, it sounds like just the role that you serve with Utah is very important from just a team dynamic perspective, from a team performance perspective, all that sort of stuff. Is there something you aspire to do next? Or are you comfortable with where you're at and you're challenging yourself in the way in which you want to be challenged? Or, and I think about this in the context of like, I would imagine Team USA from a hockey perspective has somebody that's similar to you, or maybe they borrow from somebody. Is that something that you aspire to do sort of at the next echelon, or are you comfortable with where you're at now?
Yeah, it's another great question. And it's an interesting area because this space is growing really rapidly, especially in the NHL. 8-10 years ago, my job didn't exist. And even now, probably a third of the league has my role or something similar to it. So it's the NHL tends to be behind the times a little bit compared to European soccer, maybe the NFL and NBA in some areas, et cetera. So those sports, those areas have had this type of role and these types of structures previous to us. Now we're sort of growing. And as we're sort of growing, there are now roles that are popping up that are, I guess, would technically be another step above, or, the structures are just a little bit different. But now there's, borrowing from some other sports, now we're starting to see vice presidents of performance and health in the NHL. There's a couple of these roles. And where I oversee and lead the performance group, we have a medical group that's separate. So we have sort of two silos and we work next to each other. Well, the roles that are now sort of these VP of performance and health or something similar, they oversee both of these entities because they're saying, well, these two groups are really very intertwined. They should have a common vision and a common sort of direction. So again, that job didn't exist until, I don't think there was anyone in that role till 2 years ago. So is that maybe the next progression for me from a career perspective? Maybe. I'm very happy with what I'm doing, and this is exactly where I aspired to get to. But as we talked about at the beginning, and the idea of sort of being a lifelong learner and always wanting to grow and challenge myself, there'll probably be a time where there will be some progression that I'd be very interested in, whether that be that type of role, or I think that eventually there will be an assistant general manager type role that oversees these support staff areas and leads these support staff areas, similar to in college sports where you have maybe an associate AD for health and wellness. Now, even college football and basketball teams are starting to have general manager positions and things like that. So it's always sort of progressing and growing. So I can't say there's an exact role or place that I aspire to get to other than where I'm at. I want to still very challenged and growing in this role, but eventually there probably will be some iteration that's branched off and grown that I'd have interest in.
Yeah, that's 2 quick points. One is I asked that question because if I thought about myself as like the GM Matt Smith, or if I was an owner, I would want my team or our team to have that baseline of human performance, of all that sort of stuff. I would want to know that that is at the most elite level that it can be, because if that's a variable that I can control, and arguably it is probably the thing that you can control, I would want to make sure that is standardized. And then also from a macro perspective, what would be good for Utah arguably would be good for the entire league, because you're talking about just the health and wellness of really the entire league. And then if you look at it from a Team USA perspective, I just think that there's some commonality there. And I think it is exceptionally important. And I'm glad that you are doing it. I'm glad that you do enjoy that role. But I would also say that just from a military perspective, having been someone who's flown sorties that have lasted 14, 15, 16, 17 hours, when we first started doing that, the impact on the body was just something that we had never experienced before. To do it for such a long period of time, when I'm talking about a long period of time, is to do it for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And when I came back from Afghanistan in fall of 2001, there was a lot of folks from a human factors engineering perspective that wanted to talk to us and have the conversation, like, how did you feel on sortie number 3? How did you feel on sortie number 4? And I can tell you, Devin, that, we would get to a certain point, you get to like hour 12, 13, 14, 15, literally you feel like you're inebriated to a certain extent, because the human body is not meant to operate at 33,000 feet for that long a period of time. And I think we learned a lot from that. And I think that just the military has trended in the right direction, specifically the Air Force on the impact. And I know from a fighter pilot perspective, they do those sort of studies. But I think that what you do and what the military does, I do think that there's a relationship there. Just ultimately, we're trying to do is optimize the human and to perform at the level that they need to perform, because there are decisions that need to be made, and you want your body to do things that it needs to do, so that you ultimately don't get hurt and you can maximize the results, if you will.
Yeah, no question. It's athleticism, just in a different
Right.
avenue, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Dev, you touched on something, and I can remember, again, you've been a great friend, and I've learned a lot from you. And one of the things I think that was the most just eye-opening to me, and again, we were playing at a different time, and then coached kind of in the infancy of this, but there's a lot of people out there that don't have access to what you have access to. And I remember right when you were starting with the heart rate stuff, and we came in one day and we were like, hey man, like, we're going to have this great practice and, yada, yada. And you're like, hey, the guys are shot. And it was pretty, like, we sat down and I remember talking about it. And just like, as a coach, the arrogance, maybe it would be the word, of like how much like my day impacted at what I thought of the team, right? Wife's happy. I got a great rest. I'm ready to go. Let's go practice. And finding out, man, the team was not at all able to do that. Conversely, maybe the kids are up, or maybe somebody's fighting, or maybe I'm mad at someone, whatever. I come in and I'm like, oh, maybe it's going to be short. Maybe today's not the day. And you're like, no, hey, the team, they're ready to go. Is there anything, is there anything that somebody that doesn't have the science, any metric, any way to monitor? Because, when we're talking about serving people, serving athletes, serving humans, the negative impact of not listening to those or not seeing those cues to the best of our abilities, right? Like you said, like, everybody's got constraints, but is there anything that just Joe Public or that youth coach or that Division III coach, anything that you can recommend to people to help them better navigate, instead of it's just gas pedal go all the time?
Yeah. I mean, one, I think, honestly, as a coach, whether sport coach, performance coach, whatever it is, having conversations with the athletes honestly provides most of the time, most of what you're going to need to know about where they're at. All the data that we collect and everything is, usually pretty much just in line with, if I go and talk to a couple of the guys and, hey, how you guys feeling today? Like, where are you guys at? And on any team, you're going to have outliers. You're going to have a kid that every single day, I'm ready to go. Let's go. I feel great. And you're going to have that kid on the other end every day. It's like, it's the worst. I feel terrible. So you got to know who to talk to. You got your three guys in the middle that are going to give you an honest response. But outside of that, I mean, there's two really straightforward, zero cost ways to sort of start to collect this information and make sense of it and see trends. A wellness questionnaire in the morning or beforehand, provided that the athletes answer, honestly. And again, that comes back to relationships and trust. But we did that for a long time at Lowell. It's a little tougher at the NHL or pro level. It hasn't been as successful. It's just burdensome with all the things that they have to do. But, honestly, that can provide a ton of information. And there's a ton of, you can Google, wellness questionnaire. There's a million of them, but it just gives you some insight into where their mood state is at in the morning or the day of or whatever. And then honestly, from a load monitoring and a tracking perspective, again, we use a lot of technology for that. We use GPS and heart rate monitors and all this stuff to quantify it. But the science and the research would tell you taking what's called a session RPE, rating of perceived exertion score after practice, after training, is incredibly valid and is very much in line with any of the more expensive data that we collect. And all that is a 1 to 10 scale as far as how hard was today. 1 was napping. 10 is that's a triple overtime, hardest game of my life, whatever that your context is. And then if you collect that from your players and you multiply it by the duration of your session. So if you had a 60-minute practice, if everybody says today was a 10 and it's a 60-minute practice, you have a score of 600. And if you start to look at that over time, that will show you, hey, is every day a 600? Was every day a red line? And as a coach, I remember doing this with you guys actually early on. I did session RPs with our guys and I did session RPs with you guys and I compared them. And you guys would be like, today was a 4. And the players are like, I was a friggin' 9. And I'd come back and tell you, and it'd be like, what are you talking about? How is that a hard day? And I can't tell you why. I can tell you every guy said that was awful. And vice versa. Sometimes we'd have a practice where it's like, all right, today's a work day. We're going like pedal to the metal. It's going to be an 8. It's going to be a 9. And the guys would get off like, yeah, the 5, 4, 5, not bad. And it was really insightful because again, as coaches, what we perceive is not necessarily what the player sees and perceives, and perception is reality. So taking that into account. So those are really two basically zero cost, low time frame things that any coach, anybody can do. You could set up an easy spreadsheet, and it doesn't even have to be everybody. You've got a team of 25. Again, who's your leadership group? Who are your 4 or 5 guys that you want to lean on? And you just touch base with them every couple of days or each practice or whatever. And so that's a really good way to start to do that without having to have any kind of a budget or any kind of specific technology.
Devan, I mean, thank you obviously for coming on. I hope people understand whether it's the military, coaching, NHL, Division III, it comes back to people, it comes back to communication, comes back to the trust. I mean, these are things that Matt and I are talking about. But one of the things that is important to us, and I know is important to you, and I want to just give you that opportunity, is family. And, obviously your wife, your kids, I know how much they mean to you. Maybe just give you an opportunity to talk about that support and how they're doing, in whatever context you want. But I know that is number one for you. So it would be remiss to spend an hour with you and not have the opportunity to talk about that.
I really appreciate that. And you couldn't be more right. You know my family very well. They're my rock. If this didn't work for them, as much as I love it, it wouldn't work for me. And I'm very fortunate, with my spouse, my wife, Erica, from day one, has been fully on board with living this lifestyle and doing this. And we've moved all over the country and back and forth. And it's not easy on her, especially with the schedule in the NHL. She's essentially a single mom for 6 months once the season starts, and it's not easy. And we have 2 kids, 11 and 9, that are collectively our world. And again, there's some pros to the things that they get to grow up with and see and be involved in, but there's some pretty big cons, and for them to be able to be on board and be excited about, this whole sort of journey that we're collectively on is huge. And again, it wouldn't be worth doing this if it wasn't okay with them. And fortunately they are all on board, and it means the world to me. So thank you for the opportunity to say that, because it is huge.
Devan, there's certain things in life that people deserve. And having known you a long time, I know you deserve to be a goalie dad. So I
I
know.
got two of them, two goalies.
So yeah, you deserve that. And thank you again for your time and for everything and always picking up when I call. And your generosity and friendship means the world to me. So thank you.
I appreciate it, guys. This was a blast. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah,
It's fun talking shop. And Matt, great to meet you and
absolutely.
appreciate everything. And
Yeah.
like I said, thank you very much for the opportunity, guys. This was fun.
Thanks, Devin. Good luck.
Thanks.
Cheers.